Question number 3, Amy Adams.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Finance and asks, what reports has he received on the economy?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, yesterday we received a report from the credit ratings agency Standard & Poor's pointing to the country's long-standing external imbalances as a risk. The ratings agency concluded that this external debt, driven mainly by private sector debt, leaves us vulnerable as a country. The government has identified these risks 2 years ago and set out on a program to address them. Standard & Poor's noted that New Zealand Government's commitment to get back to the budget surplus by 2016, and it acknowledged New Zealand had outperformed most advanced economies in the past 2 years. However, it said that the negative credit rating outlook reflects risks stemming from these long-running external debt, particularly the current account deficit and relatively high levels of foreign debt.
Amy Adams.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the Minister, what trends are evident in the external imbalances highlighted by Standard & Poor's?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, where Standard & Poor's have referred to New Zealand's savings record, we're seeing a few early signs these indicators are starting to improve. Households are starting to save and reduce debt rather than continue borrowing and spending. It's also evident that our external debt does appear to be rising more slowly than we had anticipated. However, it will take concerted effort over a number of years. I would estimate anything from 5 to 8 years to deal with these long-standing external imbalances. International financial markets are now much more sensitive about how much more debt countries are carrying and whether that debt is growing. And on current projections, New Zealand external debt will continue to grow from around $160 billion currently to somewhere over $200 billion in the next 4 or 5 years. That we have now one of the highest rates of external debt in the developed world.
The Honourable David Cunliffe.
Mr Speaker, does he still maintain that Standard & Poor's removal of the negative watch following his 2009 budget was a, quote, verdict on that budget? And if so, does he now admit that downgrading the outlook can only be a verdict on the policies he has implemented since that date?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, yes to the first question. And with respect to the second question, actually I think no. And most people who've observed this are a bit puzzled. In fact, last year we had the conditions where the statement Standard & Poor's have made may have been warranted. But most of the imbalances they refer to in this statement are better now than 12 months ago when they lifted the negative outlook.
Amy Adams.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the Minister, what policies has the government introduced to introduce the imbalances highlighted by Standard & Poor's?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, there's fixing our external imbalances will take a concerted effort over a period of years, and we took some first steps in Budget 2009 where we turned around post-election forecasts of never-ending deficits and ever-increasing Crown debt. This was to get under control the amount of borrowing the government itself would need to do in overseas markets. Since then, we have taken steps to address the majority of this overseas debt which is held by New Zealand households by following policies that tilt our economy more towards savings and investments and exports and away from consumption, excessive property speculation, all financed by debt. We also will be picking up the work of the Savings Working Group, who expect to report to the government early in the new year.
The Honourable David Cunliffe.
Mr Speaker, given that he cancelled the second and third rounds of his unaffordable tax cuts in Budget 2009, in part to avoid a credit rating downgrade by Standard & Poor's, why did he change his mind and bring in unaffordable tax cuts a year later, only to receive the negative outlook that he initially sought to avoid?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, the government cancelled the further rounds of its 2008 tax cuts because we needed to get on top of ever-increasing debt and deficits And despite the fact that the National Party had promised those tax cuts, we felt it would be irresponsible to follow through on them. The tax package announced in Budget 2010 is, as I've described to the member a number of times, roughly fiscally neutral. That is, the tax cuts were financed by an increase in GST and an increase in taxation of property. And I think most New Zealanders believe that that has been the right thing to do, even if they don't feel that they have a whole lot of extra cash in their pockets.
Question number 4, Sumaroni.
Thank you, Mr.